everyone. My name is Melanie Rodriguez, and I am a campus director at Florida International University in Miami, Florida, in the United States. We're so excited to have you all with us today, and we're so excited to see so many of you. If you're able to, feel free to turn on your cameras, engage in the chat throughout. And we're really excited to have an awesome conversation today with such amazing guests. And I'll pass it on to my co-campus director, Rakaya, to take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rakaya Adside West, and I am Melanie's co-campus director at Florida International University in the United States. It's amazing to see all of you here today. We're going to start by introducing the panelists that we're going to be hearing from today. We're super excited, so everyone listen up. Our first panelist will be Laniece Collins. She is one of our partners with the fellowship, a United Nations Academic Impact Global Communications Manager for the United Nations, where she is a gender focal point and focuses on issues related to youth engagement and activism, sustainable development, human rights, social equity and inclusion, and peace building and conflict resolution, something we here at the fellowship are all very interested in. So I'm sure you guys will get a lot out of hearing her speak. After Laniece, we will have Sasha Parameswaran, who works at Unicef. Sasha has been a development professional for the past 5 years, and we'll get to hear more about his story and his career journey when he speaks. And last but not least, we'll be hearing from Ines Esteban Gonzalez, who is a member of the Civil Society Division in United Nations Women and an organization she joined in 2010. So, first, we will have Laniece speak. Everyone, a round of applause.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So, or afternoon or evening, depending on where in the world you are, because I know not everyone is here on the East Coast of the US. As Adele said, my name is Laniece Collins, and I've been with the UN for about 10 years. I joined in 2010 after spending about 15 years as a journalist. So I actually started my career as a television and radio producer. And I was sort of lucky in the sense that I always knew that I wanted to be a journalist. So when I was in 3rd grade, I started a newsletter for my cul-de-sac in my hometown. And I lived on a street called Cardinal Loop. So it was called the Cardinal Loop Courier. And I would go around and interview my neighbors, because at some point my grandmother had told me when I asked her when I was little what a journalist was or what a reporter was. And she said it was someone who was paid to be nosy and to be in everyone's business. So I was like, oh my God, that sounds amazing. I get to just ask people questions and they have to answer me. This is what I want to do. So I was really lucky that I sort of found what I wanted to do when I was quite young. And so my whole career has just sort of been an extension of that, of storytelling, of talking to people, asking them about their stories, telling their stories, finding interesting ways to tell stories. So that's how I started my career. I went to school for political science and mass communications. I didn't know, at some point I was like, I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And so, you know, I interned for a congressman in my district where I went to school in California. And so I sort of thought that maybe politics would be interesting, you know, because it seemed like it was a way that you could help people. So I definitely sort of dabbled in, you know, thought about a lot of different things. And I actually never thought about the Foreign Service or thought about international civil service. It was not something that was really on my radar until in 2001. After 9/11, I was actually sent to Turkey for war coverage because we knew that the U.S. was going to go to war after 9/11, and so they have what were called off-air reporters, and we were dispatched around the world. I was sent into Turkey to enter into northern Iraq through Turkey. So I was there for a number of months, and I had to go to a lot of meetings with the U.S. State Department. I had to go to a lot of meetings where they were meeting with interlocutors in Turkey, because they have a huge air base there, Incirlik Air Base, and they were essentially trying to convince the government there to help them sort of, prosecute this war and to use this as a forward operating base. So I sort of got to see the diplomacy part, and it became, I thought it was interesting. But what I didn't think I could do was, when you work for your foreign service, for your country, you're obviously there to represent the interest of the country, which means that you have to put forth the stance that the country takes, no matter what administration is there, no matter what, positions they take. Your job is you're there to represent the interests of the country. So I thought, okay, that might be kind of hard. So I spent a couple of years doing war coverage in Iraq and in Turkey, came back to the US, and then ended up moving to Berlin to do a fellowship. And then I stayed on to work at a television station there. And while I was there, I was actually going to visit a friend and was flipping through The Economist. And at the back, in this very tiny little ad, they had an ad for the competitive recruitment exam in public information for the UN. And I had never considered international civil service. I had never considered, I just hadn't thought about it. In the meantime, I had taken the test for the Foreign Service for the US and had passed in public information. And, they offered me a post after I cleared my medical and everything. And I decided not to do it because I felt that for a career that I really would not be able to serve as a U.S. Foreign Service officer, for a career, because administrations change, the stances of the government change, and I didn't feel that I would really be able to represent those interests for, to build a career. So I had opted not to do that. So then this test for the UN came up in public information. It's a way that young people get into the organization. It's called the Young Professionals Program, the YPP. At the time, it was called something else. They've renamed it. But I was living in Berlin. I took the test, kind of forgot about it, and was like, yeah, okay. Went ahead and kind of kept doing my thing. And then eventually they're like, oh, you passed the test, do the interview. I passed the interview. And they were like, great, now you're on this roster of candidates. Again, completely forgot about it. Went back to CNN. I had worked at CNN before, went back to CNN after I moved back from Germany. And eventually I got this call sort of out of the blue, had completely forgotten about it, had been on a roster for a number of years, and got this call out of the blue that's like, oh, would you, actually for 3 calls. One was with the UN Environmental Program in Nairobi, one was with UNESCO in Paris, and one was with the UN office in Geneva for a public information officer position. So I ended up taking the job in Geneva, and that was in 2010. And I had just come off of covering the earthquake in Haiti. I had covered a couple of political campaigns. So I felt like it was a good time to leave TV news and to kind of move on. And so that's how I sort of joined the UN. And I tell that story because for young professionals, the YPP is, one of the ways to enter the UN. It's one of the ways to kind of get your foot in the door. There are a number of other ways, but that's one of the ways. So I just sort of recount that story just to let you know that that's, that it's an entry point if you're interested. And the test is offered in a million different fields. They have tests for for human rights, for legal affairs, for budget, admin, logistics. There's nothing that you can study that there's not a job there's not a job for in the UN, and that's for the Secretariat. So I know I have colleagues here from UN agencies, funds, and programs like UNICEF and UN Women, but for the UN Secretariat, which, I can give you more information on, the way it's structured, that's a very specific entry point for that portion of the UN. So I've been with the UN now since 2010, minus 2 years when I went on special leave to work at Facebook on news integrity and news literacy at the organization. But after Geneva, I moved to Bangkok and I worked in the regional office there at UN ESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, which I loved. And then I moved back to New York to work for the Department of Peacekeeping Operations for the Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, the office that was set up under the Women, Peace and Security agenda to combat essentially rape used as a weapon of war and sexual violence used in conflict. And then I left and went to Facebook, and I came back, and now I work with Academic Impact, which does outreach to colleges and universities and youth engagement. So that in a nutshell is sort of my path in the UN, but it was not something I had ever really considered. And so I actually do spend a lot of time speaking to students, particularly students of color, students of African descent, Indigenous students, to encourage them to think about careers in international service, because those communities are still underrepresented in a lot of international organizations.
Thank you, Laniece. Thank you for your introduction. Okay, so next we're going to have Sasha. His introduction. We can hear you.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit self-aware of being on mute after so many work calls now. So that's a tough act to follow, Laniece. My name's Sasha Parameswaran. I've been working at UNICEF for almost 3 years now. It was my first job with the United Nations. Previously, I'd done some development work at some smaller organizations, but this was the first time I'd been working within the UN system. And yeah, I work in the division of data analytics, planning and monitoring at UNICEF in New York in the headquarters, and have been doing so for the past 3 years as well, working on, I'm an associate program officer on program monitoring. And really what program monitoring is in a nutshell is, think of it like a short-term evaluation almost. So you do evaluations of programs after the program is completed. What program monitoring is essentially trying to shorten that a little bit and do kind of rigorous feedback and follow-up using data, quantitative and qualitatively collected to kind of keep programs on track and make sure they're running well and make sure there's that feedback loop. And I don't want to go into any more details that might get a bit boring. In terms of, I guess, how I came to be at the point I'm in my career. Well, I started off like many of you actually. I was part of the Millennium Campus Network, which again, I'd like to thank MCN and UNAI for hosting this and for launching the fellowship. I think it's a terrific achievement, and I'm so excited to be speaking to so many people from all over the world. Anyway, in terms of getting onto the path I'm on right now, I started off before university even working a little bit in some, I guess what we call, say, program countries in UNICEF. So my family is originally from Sri Lanka. I grew up primarily in the UK, and my parents almost shielded me from their upbringing in Sri Lanka because they faced their own sort of problems growing up, and so I was a little insulated from that. But the more I grew up, especially in my teenage years, I kind of understood some of the kind of things that they went through in Sri Lanka, and before they moved, and that kind of compelled me to maybe explore other parts of the world and see some of those things that I was maybe shielded from in my childhood. And some of that work took me to Nepal, where I worked just outside of Kathmandu. But also some of that work took me to here in the United States in Alabama and Louisiana, where I saw kind of the aftermaths of the hurricanes that devastated the area. And that kind of put me on a path. Originally, I was interested in medicine because that's typically what my family went into. And I still had a bit of a meandering path during my 20s and reconsidering medicine, but that kind of instilled in me like I guess the desire to want to help a broader community outside of my immediate community, the global community. And yeah, that eventually, after a while, I finished my master's. I worked for a year doing research. And then I kind of hit a roadblock because I was like maybe many of you kind of thinking, what direction do I want to go in, and how do I want to kind of solidify and consolidate a certain career path. And I took a few months off actually. So I took about 3 months off, went back home to spend some time with my parents, who I hadn't seen in quite a while. And in the meantime, I was applying to jobs, and I applied to a lot, one of which was my current position. And I didn't hear back for 3 months, so I didn't think I got the position. But eventually I did hear back, and I was in the right place at the right time, I suppose, and I managed to get the job that I'm currently in. And yeah, so that's my story, and I'm happy to maybe discuss a bit more afterwards. I should also mention that I've been, along with a few other colleagues, I helped start Young Unicef, which is kind of a nascent informal group within UNICEF of UNICEF staff, consultants, interns, what have you, anyone under the age of 35, but we also include some people who are maybe a little older. And it's a group for the kind of younger UNICEF personnel to be able to congregate and discuss the issues that we care about. And that's something I'm really excited about maybe sharing a bit more with you during this talk. So yeah, thanks. I'll end there.
Thank you, Sasha, and we look forward to hearing more from you during the Q&A. Now we'll have Ines say her introduction.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very, very glad to join you, and thank you to the Millennium Campus Network and for inviting me. I always enjoy these opportunities to engage with young people. So as they said, my name is Ines Esteban Gonzalez, and I am part of the Civil Society Division in UN Women. Currently, I work with all kinds of civil society organizations, but my current portfolio includes a very strong focus on youth. I've been working with youth for a few years already, but I really enjoy it. I'm very passionate about it. And it has been really nice to find so many coincidences with Lanice's background, because I am as well a journalist. I have studied journalism in Spain a few years ago. And then I also started my career as a journalist in the local news. I am from a big city in Spain, the capital, Madrid. But then when I finished my degree in journalism, I didn't have a job. So I applied for a job in a very, very tiny island in the Canary Island, that is also part of Spain, but really, really far from where I was from. So I found a job there in a radio station, and I took the job. And I spent, I think, one of the most wonderful years of my life there. It was as the head of the news bureau in this very small island, and it was really like, yeah, I mean, for me, the experience in local news was really, really, really extraordinary. It's like, having the world in a, in your hand, no? It's like a micro world. So I learned a lot. From there, from spending a bit more than 4 years in the local news, I decided that I wanted to go back to Madrid and studied international relations, master's in international relations. So from the local, I went to the global somehow. I studied this master's in international relations. I graduated as with my thesis was focused on European affairs and also gender equality. And then I was about to finish my master's when someone from the UN, if I remember correctly, from Unicef, came to give us a talk about what the UN was. And at that time, I was 27 years old. At that time, for me, the UN was something that I, of course, studied in my master's, but it was a very distant reality for me. It was like, okay, this is something that is, happening very, very far from me. But then the fact that these people came to my university to give this talk and encouraging us to apply for an internship, for a job, I was like, okay, so if, this is really happening for some people. Some people are getting real jobs in the UN. So, so of course, I mean, after studying international relations, working for the UN was like a dream. So I considered applying for an internship in the UN. So that's what I did while I was finishing my thesis, and I was so lucky, to get into the UN as an intern. That was 2010. It was. I'm really not sure if these programs are still running. I'm not. These internship programs at the Secretariat. We were hundreds of us from all over the world, in 3-4 months programs of internships in the Secretariat. So I was an intern. I started the internship there, and I was lucky enough to land in one of the 5 departments that merged to create UN Women. So UN Women who was created back in 2010 after the merge of 5 different departments of the UN. And then when these departments merged, then I was again lucky enough to get a short-term job with UN Women. And then I got a more like stable position in the civil society division. I started in UN Women in the communications department, back when former president of Chile and former UN Women Executive Director Michelle Bachelet was the first executive director. And there, because we were so young, we're still young comparing to other UN entities, and we are still small comparing to other UN entities. But back there in 2010, we were really, really, it was our origins, no? So I was working very closely with Michelle Bachelet, with the former executive director. It was such a great experience doing communications in Spanish. She still is a rock star, so the first years in UN Women, I spent doing communications with her, and which is, Michelle Bachelet, of course, High Commissioner for Human Rights currently, as you may know. So so I traveled with her. I accompany her to press conferences, and I do all kinds of communications work with her. Then I joined the civil society division, and which was also a great way of having a different experience in the UN and in UN Women, working with civil society organizations. I really traveled a lot. I had, uh, um, you know, I think for me, working with civil society organizations and grassroots organizations is like, again, going back to the local, no, going back to where, like, things happen at the UN. Sometimes is, working for the UN in New York is really rewarding, but but sometimes you really don't see where the impact is, right? It's very difficult to see the impact, but when you work with civil society organizations, it is again, it's really, really rewarding, because you kind of see where your work is going to. You work with grassroots organizations, you go back to the work in communities where really change is happening. And so that's, and now I'm again doing advocacy, communications, partnerships with civil society organizations. Something that I forgot to say, very important, is that when I was in the during, I still live in New York, but that was a few years back, I started filmmaking in the School of Visual Arts, because I was passionate about documentary filmmaking. I am also, as Laniece said, I'm also passionate about storytelling, and I think there are when working with women's rights and gender equality, storytelling is so important, because the stories of women is the stories of of the fight for gender equality. So I think we, part of my work in UNMN has been telling those stories of of civil society leaders, civil society activists. And also, as a filmmaker, I had the opportunity to travel to Colombia and to Ecuador to shoot 2 documentaries on the lives of gender equality activists in the countries. And in the case of Colombia, I directed a documentary on how these civil society activists in Colombia contributed to the end of the war, the end of the war with the FARC, guerrilla. So this is, in a nutshell, my story, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. And again, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for coming, Ines. Okay, so now that we've gone through introductions, what we're going to do is have a short moderated Q&A, followed by opening up the floor to the fellows to ask a few questions, and then we'll wrap up. So I will pass that on to my co-director, Melanie Rodriguez.
Thank you, Rakaya. Thank you all again for those introductions. It was wonderful to hear more about what you do and kind of related to our pathways right now, most of us as students still. For our first question, I think Ines talked about this right now a little bit, but as an intergovernmental organization works to solve high impact, whether it's small or large, within your respective positions during your time at the UN. So just so that a lot of fellows will be able to ask their questions and get the answers, we're going to keep all of these answers as short as possible. And then for the fellows, so that you have a heads up, we'll be taking questions from you as soon as this question is over, so make sure to put them in the chat, and if you're able to, if we pick your question, we'll ask you to turn on your video, turn on your camera, introduce yourselves, and ask your questions. So yes, thank you so much. Anyone who wants to take it away?
I think impact is really difficult to, I think, nail down and internalize, and I mentioned that I came from a family of doctors, and for them, it was really easy to see the impact they have, right? Like, especially someone like my dad, who's a surgeon, you literally see you know, what you're doing and contributing to. Development work is a lot harder. So I think it's important to have that sense of humility and patience as well, but not too much patience at the same time. I think it's important to just constantly see where you fit in to a bigger picture, regardless of the work you're doing. And I mean, an example that I'm coming up with is I did some work in South Sudan on trying to pilot a program monitoring framework. I ended up building a dashboard for them on visualizing their data. And that actually ended up being scaled up worldwide. And I ended up developing a similar platform for all countries to be able to use the data. So that was something I was really proud of, and in terms of creating an impact. And I think it does, especially a lot of these tech-based solutions can really improve the way that we work within the UN system. And a second quick thing I just wanted to say in terms of impact was Young UNICEF and being part of Young UNICEF and helping it get off the ground, because and this is a message I really want to drive home, is this idea of the kind of great man or great woman theory, that we look to leaders to be the kind of you know, embodiment of excellence and perfection. I think that there's a bit of a lie there as well. I think we all can take a part and play a part and embrace that kind of role of citizenship. And I think there's talent and energy everywhere, and that includes yourself. And that's something we're trying to push in Young UNICEF, is if you want to make an impact and if you want to change something and you're asking why isn't someone doing anything about it, you can always ask yourself that question and try and move the needle yourself. I'll sign off from there.
Melody, unless Ines wants to jump in, I'll just say, and I think Ines can probably also speak to this, particularly when you're working in comms. Sometimes it's very hard to measure impact, because what you're trying to do is change minds, is change behavior, and so that's really hard to measure in a short period of time. But like Sasha was saying, it's you know, working in the UN, there are agencies and funds and programs that do service provision, and you know, UNICEF vaccinates children. UNFPA provides reproductive health services. You know, UN Women has a number of projects and, you know, that impact people's lives, you know, WFP delivering food assistance. But there's a lot of work in the UN that's not, you know, that immediate kind of, you know, yes, we're UNHCR and we set up a refugee camp and we gave, you know, every family a cook stove and a tent and a blanket, and now we are housing 60 million refugees and educating 20 million refugee children and feeding 67 million displaced people every day. So it's not every job in the UN is like that. I mean, there are times when, you know, you're doing something, a communications campaign, or, you know, you're just sort of like, I don't know if this is landing. But then you look back at something and maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, and then you realize, wow, this has really had an impact. I mean, you look at something like the Women, Peace and Security agenda that was established. There was a Security Council resolution that was passed, Resolution 1325, and it was the 20-year anniversary of that. And you look back and you see how much things have changed. You look at the difference between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals and how different they were because of the input of civil society, because of the inclusion of people at the table. You know, Ines talked about going to Colombia and doing stories about FARC and civil society inclusion. And I worked with the special representative on sexual violence and conflict at the time that those peace negotiations were going on. And so what we were pushing for was to make sure that in Helsinki and in Havana and in Bogota, that women had a seat at the table because they had suffered incredible, sexual violence and other human rights violations during that during the Civil War. And so that's when you see a difference, when you know that because of the work that you're doing, someone's voice is being heard, that someone is getting to sit at the table and draft, the peace agreement that is going to govern that country moving forward. But the work that the UN does is really, unless you're responding to a humanitarian crisis, a lot of the work that we do is a marathon and not a sprint. So if you think that you're going to see immediately that, oh, look, this is, I did this campaign and this was the impact, it may take several years for you to say, oh, wow, attitudes have really changed since then. And look how different things are.
So since I already spoke about the impact, I think I'm gonna and Laniece already spoke about the impact. This is really a challenge, I think, for all of us. No, it's very difficult to see the impact. It's sometimes really frustrating because we really want to see change happening sooner than later, and we see the urgency, and we don't see really that change is fast enough. In gender equality is something that and as in many other aspects of development and equality, it is really this change is not happening fast enough, and women are suffering violence and sexual violence and female genital mutilation and and child marriages, and this is still happening, and there is nothing, or there is or we are doing our best to stop it, but really change is not happening fast enough. In fact, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and for those this year 2020, and for those who are not familiar with the Beijing Platform for Action, it is the most visionary and advanced blueprint roadmap to achieve gender equality that was signed 25 years ago. And for there is no single country in this world that has achieved gender equality. And so really this is, we call every day, we call governments, we call all kinds of stakeholders, private sector, civil society, for to join efforts to really make the changes that the women's life required, like happen faster. So yeah, let me address a couple of questions that I saw on the chat about creativity, and the questions came from Stacy and from Camila, and this is also a great question for those of us working in the UN. How do we make our and I'm sure Laniece is also a struggle. It's also that I think Laniece and we come from kind of creative backgrounds, and it's like, okay, how we can make our jobs a little bit more creative, because the UN is really it is a challenge within the UN. I think how we make our the UN more creative, the UN more innovative. And what I can tell you is that I have seen in the past years some effort coming from the UN to make the UN more innovative and more creative. This is, I think, is up to you. I think it is, of course, in the UN, but it's on every job that you will have. You have to work. You have to, you have to work to make your work more creative, if I may say. So it's. I think it's up to you to make it more creative, to make it more innovative. In my case, I was fortunate enough to have a boss who was really open to new ideas and to to all the creativity that I had and I had to offer. So in case of these documentaries that I was talking about before, I I was like, I remember that at some point I was working with some civil society organizations. I was like, you know, all these abstract structures and all these acronyms that we use in the UN. It was like, we have to put a human face on these, you know, acronyms and these structures. So I went to my boss and I was like, why don't we tell the stories behind the acronyms? And she was, you know, she was open to it, and she was like, okay, let's, you know, let's try to make it work. And next time that I was doing was, you know, I was working on a pre-production of this documentary in Ecuador. So I think you have to also be bold, be brave, talk to your boss and say, listen, we can use more innovation, we can use more creativity. Let's you know, let's try this. And I can say that, you know, I think in most of the cases, maybe your boss will hesitate at the beginning, but if you're kind of clear on what you want to do, I'm pretty sure that you know, you will succeed.
Thank you so much, everyone. And I think these are lessons we can also carry with us as fellows right now. A lot of the times we want to see impact immediately with our projects, and we have to realize that impact comes with time, and it's not necessarily going to be an immediate result. So something that Laniece said that was very insightful was to make sure, you know, like in this type of work, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So make sure to keep that in mind throughout all of your projects and all of your work. And I think it'll really serve as a helpful lesson. So one last question on my end, specifically for Sasha. I know you mentioned a little bit about Young Unicef. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, how we can get involved and how we can connect to that network?
Yeah, thank you. So like I mentioned, Young Unicef is still very much a informal group within UNICEF. It's purely started by staff, almost like a staff association, but we're looking to try and formalize it some more, namely getting funding for you know, training programs. For example, we did a leadership training pilot, and we're hoping to expand that. In terms of what we do more broadly, we sort of have settled on a framework of 3 goals. One is building a community of young professionals within the organization, not just in a certain geographic area, all over the world, and also across different contract types, you know, interns, volunteers, consultants, temporary staff, which I'm part of, and full-time staff regardless, building that community. The second one is improving the organization for young personnel. So things like improving contracts, ideally improving things like mentorship opportunities, career development opportunities. And then the third one, which is the most important one, is improving the organization for UNICEF. We say improving UNICEF for every child, which is our moniker. So, and because there are so many important ideas that quote unquote young people have to offer, and it's not just tech related ideas, it's creative ideas that are, you know, that are thinking outside the box, ideas that are breaking outside of the kind of traditional UN mold. So those are the 3 kind of main areas. In terms of getting involved, again, right now we're building up our base, and we're trying to work on also, you know, improving internship opportunities and volunteer opportunities, especially for people of color and women as well, which we're working on especially. But if you, I wrote in the chat box, if you're interested in, right now we're trying to curate a list of universities worldwide, because being frank, a lot of our university connections are, you know, typically either in the United States and capital cities, and we're trying to see if we can curate a list of, you know, universities which might not be as well known, but will be able to give us viable candidates like yourself. So I wrote my email in the chat box. I'll write it again kind of towards the end. And if you have, if you have your university to submit that you'd like to submit to propose as a university we can potentially connect with, feel free to do that. So yeah, and someone reposted it, my message. So thank you, Abdul Mujib.
All right, thank you so much. And now we're going to turn it over to some of the questions that we've had in the chat from the fellows. So our first question comes from Chloe Holloway. Chloe, if you are available and can turn on your camera or unmute yourself, state your name, school, and where you're from, and feel free to ask your question.
Hello, thank you. I'm the campus director at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my question was for Laniece. I was curious how you're able to engage like more African Americans and different minorities in different organizations, because my project Micah is doing something similar. We're trying to engage more African Americans in the environmental field. So I would love to hear your answer on that.
Yeah, Chloe. So, I mean, it's really interesting because obviously working at the UN, I mean, certainly I like to encourage, people, of African descent, indigenous people, Latinx, Latino, Hispanic people in the US to join the UN, or to at least to understand and pursue those potential opportunities. But it's also about ensuring that people from underrepresented groups around the world are aware of the opportunities. So it's not just Sasha was mentioning, we have this very sort of tilt towards maybe people who have gone to certain schools or come from certain countries. So that disadvantages a lot of people who can afford to do internships in certain cities. It disadvantages people by class, by, ethnic origin. So people from around the world. And what I find most often is that people don't even know about the opportunities. People don't know different ways to join the UN, that you can become a UN volunteer, that you can work in different duty stations. They don't understand the structure of the UN. So there may be a UNDP office in their country where they could intern, or they could find an entryway. It's really about doing outreach, broadening the scope. So we don't just reach out to the same old schools and universities. We don't just reach out in English. So I made it a real point that when I was building my team, I have someone on my team who is from China. I have someone on my team who is from Venezuela. I have someone on my team who is from Kazakhstan, who is from Kenya, who is from Brazil. Why? Because I wanted people who could speak. My boss is from Kerala. He's from India. We have someone else on our team who is from Delhi, because I wanted people who spoke Portuguese, Spanish, Chinese, Hindi, Kiswahili, and in French. Several of us on the team speak French. And so, and then I have a colleague who helps me out with Arabic outreach, because I want to reach out to people in different languages. So specifically for you, if your organization is working with environmental groups, NGOs, companies that have corporate social responsibility and sustainability departments, and they're doing recruiting, you really have to push them to recruit in places at HBCUs, to recruit in communities where you're going to find students of color, to go to those high schools, to go to those universities, and to inform students about this is a real career path for you, and this is what you need to study, because that's where we're missing. We don't know until it's too late. Oh man, I should have studied this. Oh, I should have interned here. Oh, I should have done that. And so no one is talking to us early enough so that we have the tools and we're prepared. And then what happens? You have people who stand up and say, well, it's a pipeline issue. We just can't find qualified people of color to do these jobs because the pipeline, sorry, it's not our fault. And it's like, yeah, but what are you doing to increase the pipeline? What kind of outreach are you doing to people? So I would definitely say to, increase the group of people who you're talking to and start as early as you can, because we all know once you are trying to compete with people who have master's degrees from these well-known schools and have done all the internships, it's much, much harder for us to then get in.
Thank you so much, Laniece, for answering Chloe's question. The next question we have comes from Dzidzor Sunuata. If you're able to turn on your camera and unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and feel free to ask your question.
Okay. Hello, I'm Jijo Amasunuata. My question is, what keeps you motivated working in your various workplaces, and do you have any career plans before your current workplace, and what made you change your mind?
Yes, but maybe Sasha or Ines can take that, because I know they both sort of had different, and Sasha's also earlier in his career, so I think his path is quite interesting as well, and how he decided to enter civil service.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again, Zidzo?
Okay. Hi, I'm Jijo Sunuata from KNUST Ghana. My question is, how do you keep yourself motivated working in your workplace, and did you have any other career plans before entering your current workplace, and what made you change your mind?
Yeah, so I mentioned a little bit, I was interested in medicine and development, and for a while I was trying to pursue both actually a little bit. I was considering going into public health, doing a PhD, and so I trained in economics for my master's degree. I was considering doing a PhD as well as an MD, and then eventually I kind of came to my senses. But I think in terms of what keeps you motivated and compelled to keep going in this line of work, like you said, you don't get constant feedback like you would if you were someone like a doctor or something. You're not out delivering vaccines in the field. But I mean, keeping in scope, I think at the end of the day, this isn't about yourself, right? It's not about making yourself feel good. It's about trying to make a difference. But making a difference isn't always going to be immediate, and you're not going to feel that every day. I guess what I'll say is I'll say something cheesy, but this is a different mug, but I have a mug at work, which is, this is R2-D2 from the movie Star Wars. And I purposefully took it into work my first day. It's still at my desk in my office. But I did it to, one, kind of keep myself humble, not to take myself too seriously when I started working for the UN, having, kind of a funny dorky cup. But two, keeping it on my desk to remind me at the end of the day, I guess Star Wars has a lot of personal significance for me in my childhood. So it reminded me every day to keep in scope. Who do I work for at the end of the day? It's not the Secretary General, it's not heads of governments, it's not the head of UNICEF, it's the kids who UNICEF is trying to improve the lives of. So I think small things like that, and trying to figure out, those intrinsic motivations that can keep you engaged and to constantly do the day-to-day work that fits into the overall work of the organization.
Thank you so much, Sasha. That was definitely a very insightful answer, and something that we can all remember as well as fellows throughout our work. Make sure to remember your why, remember your purpose, why you're doing the things you're doing. So our next question, our final question from the audience, will come from Nalia Dorado, and this one is for Ines. Nalia, if you're around and you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Well, my name is Nadia. I study in Puerto Rico. I study sustainable agriculture, and as I study this bachelor's degree in sustainable agriculture, it really requires a lot of integration with communities and whatnot. But I'm also actually from Colombia, so when Ines mentioned of her projects in Colombia, I could definitely relate and understand that process of that rupture between what is the dense culture regarding women's rights and whatnot. So my question is, how do you approach the cultural belief of, you know, the thick culture of the world in the sense regarding regarding their limitations when it comes to women's rights, because there is such a thing like, you know, there is this talk about moral absolutism where, you know, when it comes to cultures, there is no right and wrong, but yet there are some moral indications of, you know, humans have this right to live and to, you know, be at peace and all that that entails. So how to like approach this without being, you know, negative about it or being subjective about it when it comes to women's rights? I'm not sure my question, if like you can get my question.
Absolutely, Nadia, and gracias por tu pregunta. I think it's an extremely important question, Nadia, and it's also a complex and very sensitive one, because we see in Latin America, for example, a lot of pushback, right, against women's rights from, you know, from different kind of groups, from some religious groups. And we also, you know, we see in Africa as well how some harmful practices against young women and girls, you know, are justified, no, with religious or cultural beliefs. We see this, you know, every day. And it is important to you know, to say that you know, there is no religious, there is no cultural belief, no medical reason that can justify these harmful practices. Not even like a desire for social acceptance within our communities, or like you know, believe that we are doing something good for women and girls, for, you know, a good marriage or a good, you know, economic future or family honor, or, you know, there is no justification whatsoever for these harmful practices. So what can you do, to your question, to be practical? What do we do in UN Women to, you know, help ending these practices? We work with, you know, with religious leaders. We have seen that working with, you know, religious leaders in the communities, you know, trying to make them see that this is, you know, something that is, you know, violence against women, that is a violation of the women's rights. We have seen that working with them is, you know, has, you know, it's been really fruitful. So working with religious leaders, working with community leaders, working again, going to the very local, working with families. So this has been proved really successful, broadening our scope in terms of who we engage, because, you know, sometimes like we preach to the converted, and we have seen that, you know, we have to also, you know, preach to the non-converted in order to change things. So so that's what, be more inclusive, be more, as you know, Laniece was saying, the importance of, you know, translating into different languages to, you know, for example, in your region, Nadia, Latin America, working with indigenous in their languages, it is really important. So, you know, all this, I think, has helped in terms of, you know, trying to stop these harmful practices.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, all of you, for answering all of these questions and spending the time with us here today. We're just going to wrap up now. So if any of you have any final closing thoughts that you would like to share, any final advice, anything like that, it would be great if you could share with us, as well as any contact information, if you want to put it in the chat, for how the fellows can stay connected with you.
Melanie, I'll just say, I told Noha I'm happy to stay on the line to answer some more of the general questions. I saw a lot of people have questions about just sort of UN employment in general. So I'm happy. I don't know if Noha, you know, can stay on a little longer. I put my email in the contacts. Yeah, so happy, because one of the keys to actually working at the UN is to understand the UN and its structure, and understand what the Secretariat is, what agencies, funds, and programs are, what different country level offices do. This is a key to cracking, the UN, because a lot of people are like, I don't even know where to start. And every single entity has its own hiring practices. And so it's not a one-stop shop where you apply at careers.un.org and that's it. The 30 something agencies, funds, and programs all have their own hiring portals. So you really have to understand how the system works in order to kind of crack it. So I'll just leave it at that, but happy to stay on longer if people can.
Thank you so much. So thank you again to everyone for being here. We'll wrap up now, but if any of you can stay, we'll definitely stay around with Laniece. Thank you so much, Laniece, for staying around for a little while to answer any of those questions you may have.
Melanie, can I just say just a final word? So thank you again for this invitation. This is really this is such a short time to answer all this, but I'm glad that if you want, I can also stay. I just want to I just wrote my email address on the chat box. Please feel free to reach out to me, and please also join our UN Women's campaign, Generation Equality. This has a very, very strong focus on youth. We want really your generation to come on board on this, this anniversary of the Beijing Platform for Action. As I was saying, there are many, many things you can do within the Generation Equality campaign. You can find us, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. Generation Equality, and I will stay and answer other questions. Okay, thank you.
Could I just maybe I unfortunately have to log off as well to go to another meeting, but just last kind of few points. I just recently exited my 20s, which means I turned 30 earlier this year. Many of you are going to be going through your 20s and on your way to building a career. I just want to say, don't stress out too much. Don't get discouraged, because the most successful people will have a huge number of rejections in their kind of alternative CV. So just constantly just keep trying and don't get discouraged, and just really, really follow what you're passionate about. And I'm sure it will somehow kind of be able to influence your career in global development. But again, thank you for the opportunity and to meet so many people.
Thank you, Sasha.
Thank you.
All right, so since we still have Laniece and Ines around, maybe we can just have some more questions sent to the chat and they will be answering those.
While you guys are looking at that, I'll just say, so I put some things in the chat, but you know what I'll also do? I'll send them to Sam and Noha, just some links that are helpful. So we did a series at UNAI called Work for UN. And we did it to answer all of these questions that you have. People don't understand, like, what are the different opportunities or ways of getting in? How is the UN structured? As I mentioned at the beginning, I work for the UN Secretariat. The Secretariat is where the Secretary General sits. And there's different offices, but the Secretariat, so there's the Department of Global Communications, which is my office. There's peacekeeping operations, there's political affairs, there's the Office of Humanitarian Coordination, there's the Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Office on Drugs and Crime, the regional offices. Those are all Secretariat entities. So there's a portal where you can apply for jobs, for internships for those jobs. However, there's the entire constellation of the UN system. There's UN Women, UNICEF, High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNFPA, UNDP, the World Intellectual Property Organization, the International Telecommunications Union, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the World Tourism Organization, which is headquartered in Madrid, from where Ines is from. I mean, they're all over the world. And applying for the UN, it depends on, the jobs will depend on what your interests are, what languages you speak. I would love to work in the Middle East or North Africa. I would love to work in Beirut. I do not speak Arabic. So for a communications officer, unless I become fluent in Arabic, it's really not a possibility for me. So you're also going to have to understand, what are the limitations in terms of, if that job requirement says that you have to have fluency in, X, Y, and Z language, then you may not be able to get that job if you don't speak that language. So just understand, take a look at that series, because it really helps you understand how the UN is structured, what the different agencies are. It has links to all of them, and they all have their own internship programs. Some of them have their own young professionals programs with different requirements. Some of them have junior professional officer programs. So if you come from a country that sponsors them, just understand that for the secretariat, there's no minimum age, but the very minimum that you have to have is a bachelor's degree and generally 3 to 5 years of work experience to be even eligible to be competitive for that job. Most people will have a master's degree and a couple of years work experience for like an entry-level job. That is the minimum. So for many of you in your 20s, unless you're going to do internships, if you do internships, they count as half. So if you did an internship for 6 months, that would count as 3 months worth of experience. Some organizations do paid internships. In terms of internships, I hear a lot of people say things like, I can't afford to do an internship in New York. I can't afford to do an internship in Geneva. The UN is all over the world. There's no reason for you to come to New York or Geneva. It's very expensive. It's almost impossible. I could not do internships in New York at the television networks when I was going to school. I could not afford it. I did an internship at a local station in California where I went to school, and my mom's sister lived in Northern Virginia. So I did an internship at a television station in Washington, D.C. because I could stay with my aunt. So when people say, I mean, you can go to Bangkok, you can go to Nairobi, you can go to Accra, you can go to Kathmandu, you can go to Delhi, you can go to Santiago. There are literally UN offices around the world where you can do internships, and you do not have to come to New York or Geneva and pay the cost of living here to try and do an unpaid internship. You can look for organizations that do paid internships. UN Women, I think they pay their interns. UNICEF pays their interns. It's not a lot, but it's like, there's a stipend. It's enough for, maybe to cover your medical insurance and your transportation and a little bit of cash. But don't think that, oh, I want to intern for the UN, so I have to go to New York or Geneva. That's not the case. And to be quite honest with you, now with COVID, all of our internships are remote. So, I mean, and that's going to be the way for the foreseeable future. So if you can get an internship in your home country, maybe in the capital where you are, but you maybe have family there or something, and it's more affordable for you, I would suggest you do that. And also, because you need some years of experience, before you can enter the UN, nobody enters the UN at 22. It's very rare. You have to have a bachelor's degree if you want to be competitive. A lot of people have master's degrees, law degrees. I cannot tell you how many people in this organization have PhDs, or you've gotten a bachelor's degree and you've got some work experience under your belt. People don't walk into the UN at 22. So what you're going to have to do almost anyway is maybe work for an NGO, work for an international organization, do a UN, UNV, UN volunteer. They have, we use a lot of UNVs for translation work. So think about it, because really the reality is that to enter a job in the UN, you'll probably be more like your mid-20s after you've finished school and you've, have a little bit of work experience, and then you can, do it. And also the UN and the international system, not just the UN, I'm Interpol, NATO, whatever, there's a ton of the, the internet, the World Bank, all of these organizations, they will be here. You have time to explore other things, do Teach for America, or do, the equivalent of, the Peace Corps. I mean, you can do other things, and don't be worried that you're like somehow you're losing time or you're losing ground, because that's not the case. You know, don't stress out that if you don't get a job with the UN. And I will tell you, I passed the recruitment exam. I have gotten 4 jobs in the UN. I got the job in Bangkok or, you know, the job in DPKO and the job that I have now. So 4 jobs total I've had in the UN. And I probably have 50 applications. So for maybe every 10 applications you put in, you might get called to take 1 test. Or maybe you'll be invited to take 2 tests, and maybe you'll pass the test and take 1 interview. So it's a numbers game. Someone asked in the chat whether it's better to apply for a job in your home country or at headquarters. You apply for any job you think you're qualified to get, because I will tell you, even for those of us who are in the system, who have been working in the system, who have a reputation in the system, I've applied for over 40 jobs and I've gotten 4. So you're going to have to apply for jobs. And the UN is not like it's not like your foreign service. So for example, the US Foreign Service, every 4 years, they just transfer you and that's it. They'll send you to the language school. They'll send you and then they tell you your next duty station is here. In 6 months, you're moving. That's it. In the UN, you don't move unless you apply for a job and you get it. So as someone who has done a lot of hiring in the UN system, I will post a job and I'll get 500 applications for 1 post. So I have to narrow that down from 500 applications. I have to give people a written test. And then those who pass the written test, I have to give an interview. But that's just the way it is. It's a numbers game. If you keep applying, you will get something. But just know that you're just going to have to apply. Even those of us who have been in the system a long time have to apply. Oyekunle, I did not say 50. Yeah, I have at least 50 applications into the system, and every job that they post, you could get 300 to 500 applications if you're the hiring manager. So you just got to be ready. And that's at the Secretariat. I've also applied for jobs at FAO, at IAEA, at CTBTO. I'm not even counting those jobs at Unicef, so it's not, you have to be committed to doing the process, because that's the people who, stick with it and have a career in the UN. That's kind of how it works. But don't be discouraged. That's just how it is. It's not, people say, oh, I keep applying for stuff and I never get anything. Initially, yeah, that's how it is. But you will get something, and, you just have to keep applying.
Thank you so much, Laniece. You answered so many of the questions that our fellows had, and it was definitely very insightful, very helpful to learn about the structure. So Ines, I believe, has to leave soon, but if you want to just say some closing remarks that you had.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melanie. I think I've said it all. I just want to remind the, people that my email is on the chat box. Please feel free to write to me directly, and also visit our website and the social media for generation equality. This is really, really a great opportunity for young people to engage in the fight for gender equality. And I see many of you are doing work on gender equality in your on social media, I'm seeing, and in your communities. So this is really, really great to see. We can perhaps showcase the work that you are doing within this campaign of generation equality. Thank you so much, and hope to to stay in touch with you.
Thank you, Ines. We loved having you here.
Someone just asked if there's any particular degree field that you have to study. No. The UN has people, we have photographers, we have librarians, we have video producers, we have people who work in logistics and supply chain management, we have people who work in food security, we have people who are forensic anthropologists, we have people who are specialists in corruption and drugs and crime. We have people who are lawyers and all kinds of lawyers, human rights lawyers, labor lawyers. We have people who, I mean, there's just who are gender specialists, who are, children's rights specialists, or, protection of children, protection of civilians. We have people who served in the military, and they're security officers and close protection officers. There is literally nothing that we have budget and finance people. If you're studying budget and finance, we have human resources officers. There's literally nothing that you can study that's not applicable to the work that we do. So don't think like, oh, I only have to study international affairs. International affairs is great if you want to be a political affairs officer. If you want to be a budget and finance officer and you have a degree in accounting, or that's what you want to do, then you should have a degree in accounting. So if you're studying business administration, then you would enter in the Department of Management, and you would be you would work in business administration in the UN. So don't think that, there's yes, someone asked if UN Habitat is a viable way to get into the UN. Yes, what field or career type can I aim for as a philosophy student? As a philosophy student, you could do any number of things. I mean, you could do comms, you could do, civilian protection of civilians. You could do, there's a bunch of jobs that are just kind of like, if you have a broad-based liberal arts base where you could, jobs at UNESCO in the education field, philosophy jobs at the UN Alliance of Civilization. There are tons of jobs where it's just like, they're looking for people who are broad-based thinkers to develop some kind of curriculum or something. So a philosophy degree would be great for them. And don't forget, there are organizations like UNESCO. There are organizations like UNIDO, which, is the Industrial Development Organization. What you really need to do, someone's asking for for chemical engineering, you could get a job at the IAEA. You could get a job, which is the International Atomic Energy Association. For a chemical engineer, you could get a job at the CTBTO, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty Organization. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you have to understand the UN system to understand where's your best chance of applying. So that is really the key. To go in, and you need to look through those websites, you need to understand the structure, because the key is to get in where you fit in, right? The key is to say, like, if I'm a chemical engineer, okay, UN Women probably doesn't have a lot of use for you, right? There's a whole bunch of organizations that have a use for a chemical engineer. Like I said, IAEA, CTBTO, that's where you fit in. Probably, duty stations in Asia Pacific, in Japan, where they have a lot of, nuclear energy facilities, things like that. So you also have to look at the regions. You also have to understand, the regions where where do you want to work? What languages do you speak? Who has a need for what you're doing? Someone says a doctor of optometry. We have a whole entire UN medical system. Here in New York, we have a whole lab on the 5th floor, a whole medical system with, 10 nurses and 5 doctors and lab technicians. So optometry, you could probably get a job with UNICEF, because UNICEF does actually provide medical services for kids in the field. You could get a job with UNHCR, because they actually do have doctors who work in refugee camps. And who provide medical service, including optometric services to children and people living there. So there are jobs, all over the place. The other thing I would say is that over the course of your career, the degree that you get, you may move into some completely other area. I know people, I have stayed in communications, but I also do a lot of stuff related to human resources, because I'm a gender focal point. So also don't think that when just because you study something, that's going to be the rest of your life, and that's the only thing you'll ever, if you love it and that's what you want to do. But I know plenty of people who entered the UN doing one thing and they do something completely different. They're like, yeah, you know what? I had transferable skills, so I got a job doing this, and then all of a sudden my career took another trajectory. Or while I was at the UN, I took a part-time course and I got another master's degree going to school part-time. And now I'm doing this. Not everybody stays doing what they, I mean, I'm, you know, close to 50. So I got my degree, you know, almost 30 years ago. And so your career doesn't stay the same over time. So you don't think that this is the be all and end all. Like, once I get this degree, that's it. My life is set in stone. I can never do anything else, because your career will take off and go in directions that you have never imagined. So don't stress so much, you know, over it, that, you know, that it's just, oh, it's impossible, or I just don't know. And also, your life will change, your personal circumstances will change, you know, and we all deal with that. I have parents who are getting older, so now I'm at the point in my life where I'm like, can I move halfway around the world and take a job in Kabul or in, you know, in Somalia? Maybe. You know, if my parents, you know, knock wood, thank God my parents are healthy. But at the same time, when you get older, you start thinking about things like that. Some people will have families. And so once you get to be a certain age, you're like, okay, well, now I have school age kids, you know, can I really go and take a job anywhere in the world? Or I have a spouse, so I have to think about their career and we have to negotiate that. So just don't, your life will unfold the way it unfolds. And what I do think is important is that, as best you can, you do things like this, like the Millennium Fellowship, and you put yourself in a position to succeed. Get your degree. If you can, get your master's degree, do your internships, get your jobs working at NGOs and things like that, because then you will see a job and you'll be like, oh, I'm qualified for this job. I have a bachelor's degree. I have 3 to 5 years of work experience. You know, I can speak this language. I can do this. Put yourself in a position to succeed, because what ends up happening is, what you find is that you want to apply for something and you're like, oh man, I wish I had taken a language in school, or I wish I had done this, or I wish I had done that, because now I would be eligible, I would be competitive for that job. And particularly for women and people of color, it is very important that we tick all those boxes, because what will happen is that they'll say, and even in the UN, it is really hard to compete if you're not from certain geographic regions. So if you're not from Western Europe and North America, it's hard. And even as a person of color, you know, my mom is Black, my dad's Peruvian, but at the end of the day, I have a US passport. So when my resume, my PHP, that what we call the personal history profile, lands on someone's desk, I'm going to get more consideration than someone who's from another country. If it's for an English language press officer, I'm going to have a leg up for no other reason than I have a US passport. And that is the bottom line. And that's the reality that we deal with in the UN. So you have a real issue with underrepresentation of people from Latin America and the Caribbean in certain departments, people from sub-Saharan Africa, and people from Asia and the Pacific. And so if you're from the US, Canada, parts of Europe, you're going to get more consideration than other people do for those kinds of jobs. So just, you know, just know that, put yourself in the best position that you can, because this is the reality. You know, we're 75 years into the UN, and you have to understand it was created in 1945 out of a very colonial system. And there are still many vestiges of that left in this organization. So I'll send you guys, I'll share an article with you that was published in Foreign Policy, and it talks about the diversity issues that there are within the UN. And you think, how can it be? It's the United Nations. Surprise, surprise. Somehow, even in the UN, there still manages to be a problem with diversity. How can it happen? It does. So I would say to definitely start learning about the UN, look at the job openings, look at the job listings, to familiarize yourself with the kinds of jobs that are available, what the requirements are, so that by the time you get ready to apply, you finish school, you know what it takes to get those kinds of jobs and what the requirements are.
Thank you so much for your advice, Laniece. That was very helpful. We will have one more question for you and then we'll wrap up. And that question is, do you have any insight about UN volunteers for fellows who may want to build their experience?
Yes, UN volunteers. And like I said, I'm going to send Noha a list of things because we did a whole series on this. UN volunteers is a great entry point to the UN. They have projects all over the world. They pay stipends. They pay salary. They pay. They also have opportunities for like remote work. So even if you're in school now, for example, we use UN volunteers for translations all the time. I have a website that I have to maintain in 6 languages. We have no money to pay translators, but UNV has a program where we can, advertise. And so it's something that people can do remotely on their own time, and it starts to build your resume. UNV is a great way to, it's something great to do when you're young, because once you sign up for UNV, you could get a call out of the blue that's like, are you available to go to Mali? You're a French speaker. We saw your thing. And so literally, like, it's great to do when you're young and you don't have, a lot of encumbrance, and you can just kind of pick up and go, because they will call you and say like, oh, hey, yeah, we got your PHP, and are you ready to go? Model UN conferences. I just saw this. And I'm going to say, Model UN is an extracurricular and it's something fun to do. It does not really advantage you for any work at the UN. It's not paid employment. It's not an internship. It's great to learn about the interparliamentary process of the UN. And there's really no real governing body for Model UN. So some of them are done and they really reflect the way the UN works. Some of them don't at all. So, I think it's a great extracurricular for you to do while you're in college. It's something, if you enjoy it, if it's interesting, but it's not going to advantage you for employment. People want to see actual internships, actual employment. So if you have to make a choice between devoting your time to doing an internship and building your actual skills and participating in a Model UN, and you can't do both, I would say jettison the Model UN. It's fun and it's great, but it's not going to give you a leg up on a job. So if you're trying to choose between what's going to give you that added boost, I would say take a language class, get an internship, get a part-time, even paid work doing something. We count any kind of paid work. If you're working at a grocery store bagging groceries, that's considered paid work. And we will count that as years of experience. It doesn't matter. So if you're like, oh, I had a part-time job over the summer working in a, an ad agency, and I opened letters and I, answered emails, that's considered employment. You know how to work in a professional environment. So this is why I want people to understand you don't have to leave your country and go do these expensive internships and do that. Get a job doing something locally at an NGO, at an agency, any kind of employment where you can show that you know how to work in a professional environment and that you were given tasks and that you can complete tasks and that you're responsible. That we count that as paid work, and that goes towards your years of experience. So don't think that like, oh, I have to fly halfway around the world and work in a refugee camp or I can't get a job at the UN. Just start working or doing some kind of internship or, something where you can, the work that you're doing now, running your own, social good and NGO organizations. This is all good experience, and I would say it was probably going to help you more than doing something like Model UN.
Thank you, Laniece.
Yes.
As a current college Model UN student, that's a little bit of a hard pill to swallow, but I appreciate that.
No, it's a great extracurricular, but we're all busy. Everybody, college students now are doing so much, or like, they're working, they're paying their way through school, they have family obligations, they are doing. And so at the end of the day, when we all have to prioritize, and especially with COVID, I think has been a real, it's added another layer of difficulty. And I do not envy any of you at all for what you are having to go through and what you're having to do to continue your education under these circumstances. And it is really, it is really terrible. I mean, the mental toll, the students who don't have the resources and support at home once they leave campus. You know, it's not, I mean, the inequality is real and it's there, and it's, and the mental toll that it's taking. So if it comes to a point where you really have to, you're like, I have this great job opportunity or internship opportunity, and you have to choose because you just have to prioritize your time, I would say buy MUN. So that's all I'm saying with that. If you can do it all, keep it. If not, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so yes. That was our final question. We thank you so much for coming, Laniece. Yes. I'm sure everyone else appreciates you staying behind for over 30 minutes to answer everyone's questions. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, you guys. Please continue doing your great work. I love, Sam and Noha will tell you how much I love MCN, and it's probably one of the brightest spots of the work that I do with UNAI is getting to work with Millennium Fellows. So I'm so appreciative of you guys and the work that you're doing.
Right. Oh, and we would like to invite you to our next webinar. It'll be Thursday, October 29th. It'll be talking about personal branding, and we would love to see you there.
Great. I'll get the info from Noha.
Yes, yes. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's webinar. We hope you have a great day and that you internalize everything that we heard from our panelists today. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.